I will create a blank new project in the Games tab, select this blank preset, and let's call it Fire Tutorial. So once you're ready, you can go up here to the FAB plugin, and if it's not installed, you can go to plugins and you should see FAB right here. So first we want to add the fire asset to our project. So let's look for cinematic ground fire 1, or ground fire should work. And it should pop up right here. So we add that to our project. And you see it downloading right here. While that downloads, we can also look for the environment that I used. So what I used is the newly created environment by Quixel. So if I look for Quixel, I could type Quixel and creators. You see Quixel right here. And I really like this unfinished building one, so let's add that to the project as well. The ground fire has been added to our project in our content folder. You can see it right here. And while the environment downloads, we can have a look at the blueprint real quick. So if I just go into the blueprint folder and drag it into our scene, it should work right from the beginning. So I select it here. And you have all the controls that you need. So playing disables or enables the playing of the VDB sequence. And the second option here, enable lights, is useful if you want to path trace the effect. So without it, it doesn't look great in Lumen. But if I switch to the path tracer, which we will need as well, so go to the project settings, and type in hardware ray tracing or hardware ray, should work. And then select support hardware ray tracing, yes. Use hardware ray tracing when available, and ray traced shadows, why not? And then we will need to restart the engine, because for the maximum quality, we will need the path tracer, even though the asset works in Lumen, but yeah, path tracing is recommended for this one. All right, the engine has restarted. And now we have the path tracer available. And now you can see why I added these controls to disable or enable the playing and the lights. Because in the path tracer, it gets really crazy if you let it play all the time. So we can disable the playing to get a freeze frame. And also disable the lights because, yeah, they're only meant for Lumen. Because we're getting this illumination of the scene by default in the path tracer. Okay, so we got the asset, ground fire 1, and the scene, which is the environment that I use for rendering. So if you go into the scene unfinished building maps, you can see this industrial unfinished building level, and we will go right in. Yeah, save. And once it's done preparing the shaders, you will have the exact same environment that I rendered the asset in. So what I did is move some stuff around. I think I can just delete this cable, it's a little bit in the way. And I also deleted these glow planes. Just delete them. Delete this back wall. We don't need these lights. This can all leave. This glow plane, this light. And what I did for some lighting is select this button up here, lights, and then a skylight, where I selected specified cube map, and I think I used, this daylight texture to get this bluish skylight going. Great. I think I also removed this shell around here. We don't need that. And now we're getting some beautiful light coming in. what I did is decrease the the intensity to something like 0.2 or even less. And maybe a little bit more bluish color in the skylight. Okay. So we prepared the environment. Let's get to the ground fire. Inside the blueprint folder, you can just take this blueprint and drag it into the scene. And by default, it should just work. So I think I rotated it a little bit, moved it back. And I think I decreased the brightness of the lights, even though I'm not using them in the path tracer. Maybe something like 100 and 300. Yeah. So with Lumen, you don't get very physically accurate lighting and reflections because I think it's still in beta and it's not 100% there yet, but what you get is screen space reflections. So it somewhat works, and the illumination, yeah, is being faked by these lights. Otherwise, you just get this screen space illumination, which, yeah, doesn't really work well. So if I select the blueprint, you have these controls like playing and enable lights. And under the fire controls, you can really dial in the look you want. So use color temperature can be used to either go between physically accurate black body rendering or using a stylized color like blue, green, pink, whatever you want. So if you want to do some magic or stylized artificial flames, you can definitely do that with the asset here. But I went for the more realistic look, and that's why I used the color temperature here. And you can control basically the redness or how hot the fire is by using the slider. So the lower you get, the more red the fire looks, and the higher up you go, the more bright and hot the fire is. A default with 2400 works pretty well, if you ask me. And yeah, before we continue dialing in the controls of the fire, we can first create a cinematic camera. So under cinematic, select the Cine camera actor. Move it back a little bit into the scene. Rotate it, or we can go into the actor itself. And then I placed the camera right here. Let's make it focus the fire. So under focus settings, we can select tracking and select the blueprint ground fire 1. So anywhere we go, the fire is always in focus. Next, we want a post-process volume. And if I select it, type infinity, we want to select infinite, extend unbound. So all the effects, even outside of this little box, are applied to our scene. And what I want to add here is the bloom effect and set it to convolution, which gives a more realistic and nice look. To control the exposure a little bit more, we can select the Cine camera actor. and search for exposure compensation, set it to manual, and then increase the exposure where you want it. And basically I'm exposing for the environment first to get a realistic bluish lighting happening. And based on that, I can dial in the higher brightness. So maybe a little bit more. Yeah, this should work. Let's quickly go over the other controls that you have in the blueprint. So to make it a little bit easier, I will deselect the playing, and whoops. In here you can see we have fire brightness, density, and temperature remap values. So brightness should be very self-explanatory. The higher it is, the brighter the fire gets. I think 0.2, depending on the scene exposure and everything, should work pretty well. The smoke density, yeah, just defines how dense the smoke of the fire is. So the more I increase this density, the more the smoke will eat into the flames and we get this nice breakup. So maybe the default 0.5 is a little bit too little. So we can increase it to get even more black values. But I think like 1 or 0.5, 0.7 looks pretty good. So you can render this in Lumen if you want, or place it into your game that works with Lumen. But for cinematics, I would really recommend to use the path tracer. So if I select it right now, you see that you get the beautiful reflections and illumination of the scene by default. That's why we want to disable the lights. Otherwise it looks fake and way too bright. And oh, one thing I forgot. The blueprint is being placed always 10 centimeters above the ground. So you want to lower that to 0, so it's flush with the ground. And if you're experiencing this blocky and low resolution look in the fire when using the path tracer, you want to go to the FAB asset again. And down here I added these console variables that help with rendering the fire in the path tracer. Because what's happening here, as far as I understand it, is that the quality of the fire is too high, the voxel scale, and there's not enough memory, and we have to basically hard set the quality of the path tracer for these heterogeneous volumes. So I will just copy this one, and you can find it in the description as well. I will paste it, disable this, copy the next one, which will set the shading rate to 2. And the last one is used to allocate more memory to the heterogeneous volumes. So if you select the scene again, the path tracer will refresh, and then you will see the qualities being properly applied. We can now begin dialing in the look how we want. Maybe we want more flames. We can select a lower temperature min, or we want to crush the values more, like this. Maybe less smoke. And yeah, you can play with these values, whatever you like. I think I went with the defaults. And yeah, we can select playing and look at another frame. Maybe the brightness is a little bit too high. What you can also do is in the post-process volume. Play with the convolution intensity for the glow. Go into the camera again, under exposure. Maybe lower it even more so the fire looks a little bit better. 13 works. And yeah, I'm quite happy with the look of the fire this way. So we are ready to render out a sequence now. So to make my scene run a little bit faster again, I will switch back to Lumen and let's create a new sequence. So under here, we can set add a level sequence. I will say fire sequence 1. And now we're in the sequencer. Let's add the camera, set a camera actor, as well as our blueprint. So ground, fire, nope, actor, ground, fire. And if I scrub the timeline, this doesn't play, which is good because we want to disable the playing for our sequence because we will control that in the sequencer itself. So under blueprint ground fire 1, select track, this fire 1, and under the fire 1, select the frame attribute. So to make it simple, I will render out a sequence from frame 1 to 150. And on frame 1, I will make a keyframe, set it to 1, go back to 150 to the end, and make a new keyframe with a value 150. So if I scrub through the timeline now, you can see how the blueprint is actually playing now. But one thing you want to change, and you might notice it right away, is that it ramps up from the beginning, plays fast in the middle, and then slows down again. So to fix that, we will select these keyframes and select right-click and select linear. So on frame 12, it's 12. On frame 66, it's 66, and so on. Okay, so the fire is playing in our sequencer now. We can quickly make a nice animation with the camera. So we can select the camera, hit transform, make a keyframe on frame 1, like this. Then go to the end and just dolly in a little bit. Make a new keyframe, and now you have a nice dolly in with the cinema camera. I really dislike this easing in and easing out, so I will select linear again on the camera. And now we have the exact same movement that I had in the beginning. So for the final animation, I just added a texture of a building in the background so it gets reflected and we have some nice environment in the background. You can add that as well or play some actual buildings if you want. You can really go crazy now and yeah, play with the look, play with the fire. And if you're ready, you can render a sequence. And yeah, to do that, we will need another plugin. So edit plugin, and we need the movie render queue. Select it and restart the engine. Okay, the restart is done. Let's go back into the map again. Go into the camera actor. Go into the sequence. So everything works again. And now we can click this little button with the clapper and render out a sequence. Okay, so under settings, I deleted the default and added this anti-aliasing, an EXR sequence for the maximum quality and control in the post, as well as the path tracer renderer. Under here, the default works. We don't need the multi-layer. Path tracer default works too. And under anti-aliasing, we will select the samples. So by default, I think the path tracer in the editor uses 2048 samples, but I don't think we need that many. What I did is render it with the denoiser, which is active by default, and used 500 samples. We want to override the anti-aliasing and set it to none. Under output, I want 30 frames per second because the VDB sequence is playing at 30 frames per second. And yeah, full HD works fine. Let's select the output. For me, the default works too. Under movie renders, we can make a new folder called Fire Render 01. And then maybe call it Fire 01 and underscore frame number. Okay, double check you have everything selected, EXR sequence, path tracer, and anti-aliasing. And if you want the maximum quality, you can take these console variables and paste them in the render queue variables as well. But increase the shading rate to 1, and I think, yeah, right here I set it, shading rate to 1 and memory to maximum of 1792. All right, so to do that, I will add the console variables, add them right here. So we want the far plane auto transition to 0. We also want the shading rate to 1, which is the maximum. And we want to allocate more memory to these volumes, and the maximum of 1792 works pretty well. All right. So we have EXR sequence, path tracer, anti-aliasing with 500 samples. We don't want any temporal samples with this fire asset because then you're getting like weird ghosting artifacts when it tries to make some motion blur work. Sadly, it doesn't work really well. So yeah, set it to 1, 500 samples. And these console variables, select your output, hit accept, and then render out a sequence. The sequence is now rendered, and I opened a brand new project inside of Davinci Resolve to make those EXR files into a video. So I will navigate to the folder that we specified earlier. So Unreal Projects, Fire Tutorial, saved, movie renders, Fire Render 1. Now, because I didn't spend so much time making a nice camera animation and building the environment for the tutorial, I will just use the sequence that I rendered for the beginning of the video, so the one with the environment and everything. So I will select it and drag it into the media pool, go to the editing tab, and just drag it in. If you have Davinci Resolve set up like me, the sequence will look very dark and not like you would expect it to be. And this is because the sequence that we rendered is in the linear color space, and we need to transform it from the linear color space to the, let's say, sRGB or Rec 709 color space. So to do that, we go to the color tab, and select the color space transform. Now we don't need to do anything to the color space, but the input gamma is wrong. So if we select the input gamma and scroll down to linear and select that, you should have the same look that you had in the Unreal Engine editor. So yeah, it's playing nicely, looking great. What I did is some color adjustment. So before this node with Shift S, I will select a new node, create a new node. And under the HDR wheels, I just increase the exposure in the dark areas a little bit. And I think I lowered the overall saturation a little bit. And yeah, this is basically all you need. Some color adjustment, the color space transform from linear to the timeline sequence, timeline color space, and then we can just go to the Deliver tab and render out a sequence. So, I hope this tutorial was helpful for you. I hope you can make some beautiful, nice renderings with the Fire asset. If you have feedback, suggestions, anything, just let me know in the comments, and I will see you in the next video. Bye!